December 1st, 2016, a convention hall in Salt Lake City. On stage, under lights, sits a 50,000-pound hydrogen semi-truck wrapped in a white fabric like a magician's reveal. The crowd counts down. The fabric drops. And there it is, Nikola One, the truck that was supposedly going to make diesel obsolete. What almost nobody in that room knew, that truck wasn't running. It wasn't even close. It was plugged into a wall outlet through a power cord ran under the stage. This is the story of Trevor Milton and how a truck that couldn't drive under its own power turned into a $30 billion company, a federal conviction, and eventually a pardon that made the whole thing disappear. Trevor Milton was born in 1982 in Layton, Utah, and grew up in a Mormon family. The kind of background where honesty as the best policy isn't just a saying, it's church doctrine. He dropped out of high school, got his GED, and by his own account, made it through only about a semester of college before deciding formal education just wasn't for him. What he did instead was start companies, fast, one after another. First was a home alarm and security business in St. George, Utah, which he sold in 2006. The buyer later said Milton had misrepresented the numbers, the equipment, the revenue, the contracts, and under the terms of their deal, the business actually got handed back to Milton 2 years later. Next was Upler, an online classified site. Milton told at least one investor it was pulling in traffic close to Craigslist and would soon rival Amazon. Obviously it didn't. Then in 2009 came D-Hybrid, a company that retrofitted diesel trucks to run on natural gas. Milton signed a deal with trucking giant Swift Transportation worth a $2 million advance. Within 2 years, Swift's founder believed Milton had misused that money on things that had nothing to do with the contract. And then he threatened to press criminal charges. D-Hybrid collapsed under multiple lawsuits. Out of that wreckage, almost immediately came D-Hybrid Systems, a similarly named company built around natural gas storage tanks for heavy trucks. This one actually worked. Worthington Industries, an Ohio steel manufacturer, acquired a majority stake in 2014. And it was Worthington's money and Worthington's trust that funded what Milton did next, a $2 million seed investment into a new venture, eventually called Blue Gen Tech. He'd soon rename it after the inventor Nikola Tesla, since Tesla's own last name was already taken by a different electrifying vehicle company you may have already heard of. Nikola's pitch was never just a truck. It was an entire ecosystem, hydrogen fuel cells and battery electric drivetrains, plus a nationwide network of hydrogen fueling stations, plus a financial model that bundled the truck and the fuel together so trucking companies would pay by the mile instead of buying a rig outright. It was ambitious in a way that made engineers uncomfortable and investors excited. That December 2016 unveiling, the one from our cold open, was the opening argument. The Nikola One was pitched as a 2,000-pound horsepower, zero-emission semi-truck. Milton didn't have a working prototype yet, but he had a story, and the story worked. Within days, the company said it had racked up more than 7,000 reservations for the Nikola One. This on paper was worth over $2 billion. Within a few years, total pre-orders across Nikola's truck lineup topped $10 billion. Beverage giant Anheuser-Busch alone reserved 800 trucks. Of all of that, Milton liked to point out, without a single salesperson on staff. His hiring philosophy matched his pitch. Milton said he deliberately sought out engineers with zero automotive experience, people who hadn't spent a career learning why things in certain industries supposedly couldn't be done. In 2018, he moved the company from Salt Lake City to Phoenix, partly to pull out young engineering talent straight out of Arizona State University. The money kept following the story. In 2019, CNH Industrial, a European maker of heavy equipment, put $250 million into Nikola for a stake worth just under 8%, valuing the whole company around $3 billion. On paper, that made Trevor Milton, a high school dropout with no engineering degree, a billionaire. Just think about that for a second. Then came 2020. The year everything accelerated. In March, Nikola announced it would go public by merging with a shell company, a SPAC, called Vecto IQ, a route that let it skip the deeper scrutiny of a traditional IPO. The merger closed in June. The stock started trading, and within days, it had more than doubled. By late June, Nikola was already taking reservations for a second vehicle, an electric pickup truck called the Badger, despite the fact that no working prototype of the Badger had ever been shown to the public. At its peak that summer, shares traded above $90, and Nikola's market capitalization crossed $30 billion. For a few weeks on paper, a company that had never delivered a single production truck was worth more than Ford Motor Company, a 117-year-old manufacturer that builds and sells millions of vehicles each year. Then on September 8th, 2020, General Motors announced it would take an 11% equity stake in Nikola, worth up to $2 billion, in exchange for engineering and manufacturing support to actually build the Badger. For Wall Street, this was the moment Nikola stopped looking like a story and started looking like a real company. One of the largest automakers on the planet had just put its name and its engineering behind Trevor Milton. By every visible measure, this was one of the great modern industrial stories. A high school dropout from Utah, 6 years removed from a failed natural gas retrofitting business, running a public company that had briefly outvalued Ford. 2 days later, it started falling apart. On September 10th, 2020, a short-selling research firm called Hindenburg Research published a report running dozens of pages. Its title accused Nikola of trying to parlay, in its words, an ocean of lies into a partnership with the largest automaker in America. Hindenburg had taken a short position in Nikola stock, meaning they'd profit if the price fell, and they spent months building a case for why it should. The centerpiece was that Nikola One video, the one used to promote the truck as fully operational. Hindenburg's investigators traced it back to 2018 and found the truck hadn't been driving under any power of its own. It had been towed to the top of a hill in Utah, put in neutral, and released, film rolling downhill, then presented to the public as a truck in motion. But the report went much further than one video. It alleged Nikola had claimed to build its own inverters and other core components in-house when it hadn't. It alleged the company had widely overstated the size and value of some of its supplier and customer contracts. And it dug back through Milton's entire career. The hybrid, the alarm business, Upler, arguing this wasn't one bad video. It was a pattern going back a decade. Mills' response was to go on the attack. He called the report a hit job, dismissed the claims as lies, and suggested short sellers were fans of a rival electric vehicle company trying to sabotage a competitor. It didn't work at all. Nikola's stock, which had traded above $90 a share at its peak, began to collapse. The Securities and Exchange Commission and the Department of Justice both opened investigations. General Motors quietly went back to the negotiating table and came out on the other side with a completely different deal. No equity stake, just a fair, more limited supply agreement with no Badger production commitment at all. Then 10 days after the report, on September 20th, 2020, Trevor Milton resigned as executive chairman. In a later court filing, he claimed that resignation was about caring for his ailing wife. Prosecutors argued the timing told a different story. He didn't walk away empty-handed. Milton kept more than 90 million shares of Nikola stock, worth at that moment still north of $3 billion. The company he built would spend the next 5 years trying to survive what he'd done to get it there. He would spend those 5 years finding out exactly how much a stock collapse can cost you personally, even when you're the one who caused it. In July of 2021, a federal grand jury indicted Milton on 3 counts of securities and wire fraud, accusing him of making false and misleading statements about nearly every part of Nikola's business, specifically to get retail investors to buy the stock. A 4th count was added the following year. His trial ran 3.5 weeks in Manhattan. A Manhattan federal courtroom. In October of 2022, the jury convicted him on 3 of the 4 counts, 1 count of securities fraud, 2 counts of wire fraud, and acquitted him on separate securities fraud related claims about the Badger's reservations. At sentencing in December 2023, prosecutors asked for 11 years. Milton's lawyers asked for probation. Federal guidelines actually suggested something closer to 28 to 30 years. The judge, Edgardo Ramos, settled on 4. Telling Milton directly what he said about the company was, in the judge's words, materially wrong. Ramos even drew a contrast with a case everyone in the courtroom was thinking about: Elizabeth Holmes, already serving her own sentence for fraud at Theranos. Ramos said Holmes had pushed something she knew didn't work. He wasn't convinced Milton had done the exact same thing. Milton got 4 years. Holmes got closer to 12. He also got a $1 million fine and a forfeiture of a Utah ranch tied to one of the convictions. Nearly a year later, in September of 2024, a separate arbitration ruling ordered him to personally repay Nikola almost $168 million. But here's the part that matters the most. Milton never actually went to prison. He stayed free the entire time, out on a $100 million bond. And while that appeal sat unresolved, prosecutors kept pushing, asking the court to finally order restitution, $680 million to defrauded shareholders, plus another $15.2 million to a single named wire fraud victim. Meanwhile, the company Milton built kept sinking without him. Its trucks got recalled for defects. By its third quarter earnings in 2024, Nikola told investors it had enough cash to survive until early 2025, and not much after. In February of 2025, Nikola filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy. 2 weeks after that filing, everything changed again. Not because of a courtroom, but because of a phone call. In March of 2025, Trevor Milton announced on Instagram that the President of the United States had called him personally. Donald Trump had signed him a full unconditional pardon. Milton and his wife had donated more than $3 million to Trump's campaign and allied political efforts the previous fall. The pardon didn't just erase a prison sentence. Milton was never actually going to serve. It legally erased the restitution case before Judge Ramos could even rule on it. The $680 million, the $15.2 million, all of it gone by definition because a pardon crime can't carry a court order payment to its victims. The retail investors who bought Nikola stock believing in a video of a truck that was never actually driving got nothing. Within months, Trevor Milton had a new job title, chief executive of a private jet manufacturer. One newspaper covering his comeback captured the moment with a headline that basically wrote itself: a pardon fraud convict mounting a comeback, asking the market to trust him again. So what's the actual lesson here for anyone building a company right now? The first lesson is about diligence and who's actually doing it. A truck rolling down the hill in neutral is not some subtle accounting trick buried in a footnote. It's the kind of thing one competent engineer or one on-site visit could have easily caught in the afternoon. Instead, it took an outside short seller, someone financially motivated, to find this flaw. That firm had to come in and do all the work that venture investors, retail investors, banks, and one of the largest automakers on earth all skipped. They skipped that to a $30 billion valuation, by the way. The SPAC route Nikola took exists specifically because it skips the deeper scrutiny of a traditional IPO. That's not a technicality. That's the mechanism that let the story outrun the facts for 4 straight years. The second lesson is uglier, and it's specific to right now. A criminal conviction used to be effective into the story. The moment consequences became permanent, whatever happened on appeal. Trevor Milton's case shows that that's no longer something you can assume. A pardon didn't just spare him a prison sentence he was never going to serve anyway. It erased a court's restitution order to real victims, years after the jury had already weighed the facts and decided them. If you're the one underwriting risk, as an investor, as a lender, as a partner, or even a regulator, here's the uncomfortable takeaway. The diligence you skip today doesn't just expose you, there's eventually a conviction. As Trevor Milton just proved, it can cost you even after there is one. Another thing I want to add in here is it's interesting how people like this can constantly make these mistakes and be essentially career fraudsters and nothing happens to them. They can still raise capital with a history of scamming and fraud-like behavior. Just something to point out. I'll let you point out the pattern. Go look at the Forbes 30 under 30 list and then go look at who's getting caught up for fraud. And then also look up who is raising capital consistently in the startup world with relatively no issue. Just an additional point. Hey, what do I know? Thanks for tuning in. Please subscribe.